The more and more college football changes, the less people are into conference championship games. But the more times and the more moments that we have of two undefeated teams going at it for the conference championship, the more reasons that they should still be there. Even when you do kind of have a dud matchup, for example, with Virginia and Duke. But nevertheless, this is going to be a really fun matchup for two teams that are undefeated. Historically speaking, the first time this ever happened in terms of the Big Ten championship. And I think in many ways, what I also think is going to be really fun about this game is, at least statistically speaking, there are a lot of similarities and a lot of mirroring. For example, Julian Sain and Fernando Mendoza could stake their claim for the Heisman Trophy. If you ask me, I think Fernando Mendoza should win the Heisman Trophy today if it were up to me. But this game could have some implications on that front, especially since the Heisman Trophy is usually decided before the college football playoff. So we'll see what happens on that front. But what Indiana and Ohio State both have in common is they're both in top of the ranking in terms of EPA margin, pass success rate, and net points allowed per drive. And they also rank in the top 5 in EPA per rush, EPA per pass, and points allowed per quality drive, which is really just a long-winded way of saying that they are both clearly dominant. They both don't really have too many weaknesses, and they've both been fairly consistent this year. And Indiana has only allowed multiple touchdowns just one time in their last 6 games, which was the Ohio State game. They both tackled very well. They're both super disciplined, and they both know how to get after the quarterback. But I think what really kind of distinguishes Ohio State from Indiana in this regard is the fact that when you look at this Ohio State team, they have NFL worthy talent at every position on the football field, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. And they are only the second team in the modern era to hold every opponent that they've played to under 17 points. But to give a shout out to Matt Patricia as well. I think a lot of people kind of walked in thinking to themselves, I don't know how I feel about Matt Patricia, especially since he's never really been a college football defensive coordinator. But the transition has gone really smooth, and I think a lot of the time that gets overlooked when you have brilliant players like Caleb Downs, like Arvell Reese, like Caden McDonald, like Caden Curry, and at every position. So when you have those guys in the front seven, and then you have Downs and Lorenzo Styles holding it down in the secondary, it's just a team that is just incredibly difficult to beat. And for Ryan Day, I mean, give him his flowers too for being in a circumstance where he's replacing both of his coordinators, coming off a national championship. And I remember the narrative before was, oh, will Ryan Day ever get the job done? Well, he got the job done versus Michigan at the Big House, by the way. And they've gone through this entire season without really having a hiccup whatsoever. And also, too, nobody really knew what was going to happen going from transfer Will Howard to redshirt freshman Julian Sayin. But Julian Sayin has ran with this as best as he could. He's been an incredibly poised decision maker. He's a guy that definitely has all the intangibles to keep having success. And at the same time, only 4 teams have managed to score double-digit points in Ohio State. Now I think Indiana is going to be one of them, and I think it's going to be a relatively low-scoring game because even when I shift my attention to Indiana a little bit, Indiana went on the road and beat Oregon at Osmond Stadium, and I think that victory gets overlooked in terms of Indiana's resume a little bit because it's it's been a little bit. But another thing I'd like to mention too is I'll be the first one to admit that I was on this train as well. But Illinois was kind of, pointed as the Indiana of this season. And I was definitely on that train when you have Luke Alkmaar. You had a lot of guys returning on the offense side of the football, but they beat Illinois by 53 points this season. And Kirk Cignetti deserves a ton of credit for changing the culture of the program, for bringing in all the talent that he has, for just completely elevating the roster and just the personality too. Because the reality is, the guy's a winner, and he deserves credit for that. He's a guy that is very hands-on when it comes to which recruits that they bring in, how much money that they're paying guys, which is a little bit abnormal compared to a lot of other schools where it's primarily, the head coach is kind of telling the position coaches like, hey, just recruit what you want, and I'll kind of take a look at film, and we'll talk about it in the spring. But no, Kirk Cignetti actually approves every single player that's on the football field. So he is very much the CEO, the dictator, so to speak, of Indiana football. But it is 100% working, and particularly if we want to shine a light on anything in terms of what Indiana has done in terms of the transfer portal, for me, it's got to be the offensive line. Because I think when I was kind of thinking about Indiana going into the season, one of the things that I was 100% sure of that they really need to improve on was being stronger at the line of scrimmage. Because aside from bringing in Fernando Mendoza from Cal, that has really been the biggest difference maker between Indiana last year versus Indiana this year. Because Mendoza very well may be the number one pick in the NFL draft. And right now he's leading them to a 12-0 title, 12-0 record. If they win the Big Ten title, it'd be the first time they've won a Big Ten title since 1967 and the first outright conference title since 1949. They both have such explosive offenses, excellent receiver room. Elijah Surratt, who came over from James Madison, has just completely evolved into one of the best playmakers in the entire country. And that's definitely a testament for how Indiana has been able to develop from within to some degree, right? Because you definitely was able to bring a lot of the roster from James Madison over, but at the same time too, they were also able to be creative and bring in other guys too who have ultimately been, really important for their success. And, for example, Indiana's not necessarily known as a running team necessarily, but you have guys like Roman Harvey and guys like Carrion Black who have combined for 1,500 rushing yards and 13 touchdowns. So they've had a really nice 1-2 punch there that I think they're going to kind of hope to be able to at least bring a little bit on for Ohio State. Because I think if you're Indiana, one of your keys to victory is going to be, how do you make Ohio State be overly aggressive to the point where they're shooting themselves in the foot, right? I think those are kind of the moments that I think Indiana's going to have to exploit and really capitalize on. Because to me, the difference in this game is going to be, hey, does Indiana make that key play on third down? Hey, does Fernando Mendoza find that wide open guy if Ohio State were to break a coverage? I think those are going to be kind of the conversations that we're going to end up having, because I don't think this is going to be the type of game where Ohio State's is going to dominate Indiana, then they walk off in the sunset. To me, it just doesn't really feel like that kind of game, because Indiana has proven themselves to be one of the best in the country. And not to mention, too, Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, 1-2 punch, have both been back since last week at Michigan. And both of them were 100% on point, and I think they're just going to be super explosive. I mean, when you have a guy like Jeremiah Smith, who has 72 receptions on the year and 11 touchdowns, he's going to be a force to be reckoned with, especially in the red zone as well. He's a guy that they target a lot. And Carnell Tate, too, he's going to be a guy that is going to get some catches, too, because the reality is when you have both those guys that you can throw to, I mean, it's just it definitely makes it fun if you're Ohio State. But at least on paper, I think they're both these teams are relatively even a number of different ways. I think just like Indiana, Ohio State hasn't given up many points this season. But to me, what's the big difference maker going to be? It's going to be the turnover battle. It's going to be the line of scrimmage, and it's going to be who makes those key plays on third down that ultimately is the difference between being a Big Ten champion versus being an at-large bid.